I have a picture I want to show you, and I want to see if you can guess where this might have come from. Anybody guess the time frame? 1930s, the Great Depression. Anybody guess the city? No, not New York City, and it wasn't Collingwood. That's what I tried to do. No? Toronto. Yeah. There were bread lines in Toronto in the 1930s. Don't know if there was in Collingwood. I would imagine there probably was. And if you think this through, look at the picture. What a waste of human productivity. Right? Here you have all these strong, abled men. My guess is of most of them, had you give them a job that day, they would have worked themselves in the ground. And what are they doing? Just standing, waiting in a bread line. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Has anyone here ever had to stand in a bread line? No one wants to claim that. Yes, I have. I actually went to Bucharest, Romania in 1995. And I saw a bread line. Now, I didn't actually have to stand in it because somebody stood in it for me. Didn't think that would go over well with an American standing in a bread line in 1995 in Bucharest, Romania. I stood in a bread line, and then I watched what happened. The person stood in the bread line. I think they probably bribed to get towards the front of the bread line. And then when they got done with that, they stood in another line, got back in another line to get meat. And just to get a little bitty thing of bread and to get a little piece of salami that I would eat on for a couple days took hours to do. And I kind of contemplated it back then. I was young, had hair, and I figured out what was. The whole society, but particularly the food, was designed by the ex-communist leaders to control people. If you had to be in line, and you had to be in line early in the morning to get bread and to get milk, and then there was one for dairy. That's what somebody did all day long, or at least most of the day, just to survive. If you're doing that, you don't have time to think about rebellion or anything else, getting ahead. Now, here's the crazy thing. I was in Bucharest, Romania 5 years after communism had fallen. No one was making them get into bread lines anymore. They just hadn't figured out how to change it. They were just kind of stuck in the bread line system of their economy, and they didn't know how. Now, I did look on the internet, and in the last 4 years, they have figured it out. They have beautiful grocery stores. You can go into one store and just go in and buy everything you need all at once. And I'm glad they've kind of moved away from the system. But while I was there, they were still living just in that survival, get through the day, bread line system. And I wonder if we do sometimes. We're in a series on the Gospel of Mark. Last week I kind of left you saying that we're going to do kind of a two-part sermon, and today we're going to do that second part. If you missed the first part, it was this kind of interaction between Jesus and his disciples. There had been 2 feeding miracles, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. Then they'd had this interaction with the Pharisees afterward, in which they demanded a more specific sign. They wanted a more miraculous event. And Jesus had warned them about allowing this leaven into them, into the disciples. The disciples heard this from Jesus. And last week, we ended with this idea. I encouraged you to remember. Begin to remember what God has done. And I asked you to think about specific experiences, specific things that had happened in your life, and you think, oh, I forgot all about that. That's okay. We're going to give you time to do that today. And that's where we're going to pick up the story. In Mark chapter 5, 14 through 15. Mark chapter 8, 14 through 15. Now they had forgotten, speaking of the disciples, they had forgotten to bring bread. Jesus is getting in a boat, and this is where we pick up the story. They had forgotten to bring bread. They only had 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." Jesus is warning them to be careful, to be very careful about this thing that creeps in and begins to alter everything. And once again, in the Bible, leaven, yeast, is probably the most well-known. Yeast is almost always viewed in a very negative light. It's destructive. It's destroying things. I know we don't view it that way, but they did. And the thing that he's warning them about is this sign that they wanted that would be greater than what God had already shown them in the two miracles and the other miracles that they had seen. They wanted more and more, the Pharisees did. It was never enough. And once again, there was a heart issue with them. But Jesus goes on, and the leaven has begun to work itself into the hearts of the disciples. They have seen the miraculous provisions of bread, but it's not doing what it's supposed to do. They still doubt Jesus. They fail to comprehend all that took place. And there is a developing hardness of heart. In the next few verses, it says this, and they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Jesus gives them this very stern warning. Guys, be really careful about the yeast of the leaven. And they go, oh, he's talking about bread. They began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? What are you guys talking about? It's probably one of those moments where Jesus went, oh my, with his disciples. Don't worry, he's done that with you too. Although they had seen these two miraculous feeding miracles, all they can think about is, wow, we forgot to bring bread. Who was supposed to bring bread? It was your turn to bring the bread. No, it was your turn. I saw you in your hand. I told you to bring it. It's not my fault, Jesus, that we don't have bread. You can hear Jesus in these words going, guys, has the lack of bread been a problem recently? Has there been a moment in the recent past where you went, wow, we're going to starve to death? Instead of moving beyond that little problem of, wow, we've only got one loaf in here. Oh, well. Instead of doing that and moving to look at the significance of what had just been witnessed, what they had seen in the multiplication of bread, instead of spending time contemplating that and thinking about that, they're trying to figure out who to blame that there's no bread right now. And they're missing all that Jesus was doing. And I want to ask the question, could we easily be doing the same thing, just standing in a bread line? Spiritually wasting productivity. It's a great question for us to contemplate. Well, the story goes on in Mark chapter 8, 17 and 18. Here's what Jesus says. Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Hold on to that one. Are your hearts hardening? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do not see. Having ears, do not hear. And do not remember. Are your hearts hardening? I want you to think about what you normally think about when you think about the hardening of the heart. And if we don't use the phrase very often, but if we were to hear that, oh, they got a hard heart, what we normally think about is a lack of compassion, maybe a lack of compassion to the people around them, to the poor. That's not what Jesus is talking about at all. Matter of fact, it will lead to that, but it's much deeper. What Jesus is asking and what he's connecting here is, you're not using your eyes, you're not using your ears to your spiritual profit. The ongoing exposure to Jesus' teaching to his miracles was leading to spiritual dullness. It wasn't supposed to, but it was on them. Their hearts were getting hard to what they were seeing and hearing. They're profiting from the work of God. They're eating, physically eating. But they're doing it without reflection. And in so doing, their hearts are becoming dull to what God is doing. This is what was happening to the Pharisees, or what had already happened to the Pharisees. And Jesus is warning them, you're moving in the wrong direction. And I want to challenge you this morning. Hear Jesus' words. Are your hearts hardening? Are you really responding to what God is doing in your life and what you're hearing about Christ in the way you should? Now, Jesus doesn't leave them there. These words are not angry words where he's ready to throw these guys out of the boat. That's not what he's there about. But what he does do is this. He goes, think, guys. Use your brain, use your eyes, use your ears. Put it all together. Contemplate. Move beyond breadline living. And think about what's going on around you. Think about what you have just witnessed in these two miraculous miracles of bread. Don't let the yeast of the Pharisees sneak in. Jesus picks up in verse 19. He asked them some questions. And I want you, because we've read these stories, or maybe you know the stories already if you weren't here, of the feeding miracles. He asked them some questions, some very specific questions. He says this, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketful of broken pieces did you take up? Anybody remember the number? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for 4,000. How many basketfuls of broken pieces did you take up? And they said, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? Do you not get it? Can you not put the pieces together, guys? If you look at this, they get the right answers. They can remember physically. They remember that they picked up 12 the first time and they picked up 7 the second time. So they get the right answers, but they know no understanding. No, they just go right back into getting in the bread line, worrying about the next meal, worrying about what's happening in their lives, missing the great work of God all around them. But then I find myself asking myself the same question, how often have I done the very same thing? Experienced God's greatness and amazing things and inexplicable things in my life, and just a few moments later, thinking about the next thing to get done in the bread line. Well, let's go through the questions and see if we can make some sense of these things that the disciples were struggling with. And what were they supposed to maybe at least think about? In the first feeding miracle, how many loaves were there? 5. How many men were there? 5,000. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidental number. There was nothing coincidental about this at all. There's nothing accidental in the slightest. Each loaf feeds 1,000 men and women and children. But 1,000 men out of each loaf. Wow. How many basketfuls were left over? And the first miracle, there were 12. How many apostles were serving? 12. Wow, what a coincidence. No, not at all. Last week we talked a little bit about this. What kind of baskets were they? They were lunchbox sizes. I wonder who they were for. The second feeding miracle, how many loaves were there? 7. 7 loaves. How many baskets are picked up at the end? 7 large, commercial size baskets full of scraps. Jesus is asking them these questions and going, hello, are you connecting the dots here? There's no coincidence here. Do you not see the amazing planning and organization that took place here? And then he asks the question, how much did everyone eat? And here's actually one of the unique things, if you read these stories really carefully, one of the few details that is expressed exactly the same in both is this. Everyone ate and was satisfied. In other words, they ate as much as they wanted. There wasn't a division and going, okay, each person gets X, and that's it. Each person ate as much as they wanted until they were full. Now, who does the food planning in your family? If you do food planning in your family, I want you to raise your hand. You organize the food. You decide how much is going to be made. I want you to just to contemplate with me for a few moments. My life a few years ago, we would try, normally Lori, would try to decide how much food to plan for a meal. We had 2 teenage boys. Thank you. That was meant to be funny. And for those that have been here a long time, you know that we have a son named Sam. I have never heard the words, I'm full, from my son Sam. Never. Never in my life have I heard those words. I've eaten all I can eat. I can't eat no more. Now, I know that's not alone. Some of you have teenage boys right now and you're going, there's no end to it. I want you to think how difficult it would be for you just with your family to sit down and do just this simple process. Decide exactly how much food you need to feed them as much as they want and still have the exact amount of leftovers you need for tomorrow. How lucky would you be with just your small family? Well, you have no idea, right? Because if you're like our family, the kids came home and on the way home they happened to stop by Little Caesars and picked up a pizza or 2, and they've already eaten that, so they're not very hungry tonight. Have anybody ever had that experience? Yeah. Or just the opposite. I didn't eat lunch, I didn't have my snack, I forgot that, I lost it, I left it on the bus. I am starving, and I'm going to eat the house down. Which night is it going to be? Who knows? And as a parent, what do? You just make a whole bunch and hope, don't you? That is not what Jesus does at all. Listen carefully. Jesus knows exactly what each human being will consume during these 2 feeding miracles. He knows exactly the amount they will eat. Free will. He gives them free will. Eat as much as you want. Eat till you're full. Eat till you can't eat anymore. And yet, miraculously, he's able to plan the outcome to exactly what he wants it to be. 12 small baskets so his disciples would have food for the rest of the day. 7 large basketfuls representing fullness and completeness in the area he was in. Everything was designed ahead of time. In this miracle, these 2 miracles, the disciples could have witnessed the most complex theological concept that even I to this day struggle with, and theologians have struggled with for generations. The sovereignty of God, getting the outcome He has planned and designed, held in tension with the free will of mankind. Eat as much as you want. Well, I think I'll have a little bit more. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to bring about what I want to bring about. 7 full baskets. or 12? That's what they could have seen. That's what they should have seen. Those are the questions they should have been asking, not, who forgot the bread? Come on, guys, get it together. They had witnessed in these one small moments the incredible reality of free will of man working with God's sovereign plan on this planet. And yet they failed to grasp even the first nuances of this miracle. And here's the big question, why? Why did they do that? It's very simple. Jesus says two things. Do you not remember? Do you not understand? There's just two simple questions there. Do you not remember? Do you not understand? I want you right now to sear those into your mind. If you take nothing else away, grab a hold of these two and go, I am going to do better than that. I'm going to be able to answer those questions when Jesus asks me, yes, I remember. Yes, I am at least understanding some. Why did they not remember? Because they didn't reflect. They didn't try to remember. They didn't make it intentional. Why did they not understand? Because they hadn't thought about it. They just got back in the breadline of life. And this is where I want to take us now for the rest of this morning. This morning is going to be just a little bit different. We got a little bit of time. Wow, good. You guys know me. Normally that's not the case. I actually want to put this into practice. I want you to know that I have been trying to do this for now over 2 weeks to go back and remember. And I want you to begin to try to do this. One at a time. I'm going to share some things with you, and I want you to go, I want to remember. If you have a smartphone, or if you can, I know it's dark, if you have a way to write things down, open it up. I want you to take a note. I want you to write this down on paper. I want you to write it on your screen. We could do that light up the world thing. You guys own cell phones? Like, you guys lose your cell phones? Oh, there's one. Okay, perfect. Open up something you can just take a note down on. The first one is very simple. I want you to begin to reflect on your earliest memories of your experience with God. I was struggling to do this. Somehow, early childhood memories they seem so distant now. And Sunday night, a bunch of us had gathered for a unity service, and we were worshiping, and I was actually trying to do this, and I was having a really rough moment there that night for some reason, doesn't matter why. I'm having this rough moment of saying, God, help me remember those first moments where I felt like I was talking to you and you were talking to me. I was just a boy. Help me remember. And the worship team that was there started singing Reckless Love. Many of you, if you've been around, you know that song. Talks about, God will go anywhere for me, do anything for me. And there's this first part about that he sings over me with love. And all of a sudden, from behind me, I hear Christian church word. If you guys are new to Journey, I don't know exactly how old Christian is. Anybody know? Roughly 5, 6, something like that. All of a sudden, the top of his lungs, he's screaming out the words to this song. And his dad's trying to keep him quiet. And my heart is overwhelmed. Because God's going, that's what you sounded like when you were a little boy. You sang about as good as he did that night. It was loud, not on key, but it was loud. That was me. As the song went on, I began to remember moments with God when I was young. That's what I want you to just take a moment. I want you to think, what are my earliest memories of God? When's the first time I prayed or the first time I said, God, I want you into my life? If you're here and you're going, I'm not sure I've ever done that, I encourage you to quietly think, reflect, and see if God doesn't bring something to your memory. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to write a few things down. Let the memories begin to start. Secondly, after you think of those first few moments, try to reflect on a few moments where God reached out to you when you were walking away. Maybe you became a prodigal or just weren't at your best. How did God reach out to bring you back? third one? Has there been times in your life, and this may be where some of you actually begin because this is something that connects with you and you may not even know the answers to the first two. Is there a time in your life where you know for certain you have no explanation for your physical protection except that God intervened? Something happened to keep you physically safe. The last one for this morning. A time of unexplained provision. Something happened financially, food, that you can't explain. There's no explanation that seems plausible except God stepped into your life and helped. How many have had a few things come to your mind? Maybe things you haven't thought of in a long time. Somebody shared one with me. Thank you. The earliest memory, and I don't think I've asked permission, so it's Lisa. Earliest memory, vividly at 8, when God showed his power through the community when my dad needed an urgent surgery on Christmas Day. A community collection was taken, and they received the exact amount of money they needed for the plane tickets and the lodging. It's just that exact amount thing that you just kind of go, man, God, miracle? What was that? I want to challenge you to the next step now. Jesus called his disciples to remember. Bring it to your mind. I encourage you over this coming week, go through this again. Allow time. You're thinking, I don't know what to pray. I don't know what to do. Take this and just take each piece and go, when were the earliest memories? When did I walk away and you brought me back with your love? When did you protect me? When did you provide for me? And allow God to remind you of some of these great moments of what he's already done for you. But then take the next step. Reflect. What does it mean? It's an interesting thing because I was doing one of these this last week, and there's been an event in my life that I've had no explanation for forever. I have no idea why it happened. It made no sense at the time. I still can't kind of figure it out. But today when I started reflecting on it, or this week when I started reflecting on it, it began to make sense. Not because it did something at that moment, but it taught me something about God. It told me something about him that I needed to know. I want to encourage you to begin to look at your list and just ask simple questions. What is God revealing of himself to me in my experiences? I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to do that. Worship team, you guys can come on down. I believe as if you continue to reflect on these and you begin to ask the very simple question, God, what does this mean? What did this moment reflect? And I'll share what kind of came out of the perplexing one I had in my life years ago. And it doesn't really matter what took place, but the point is that somehow I had put God into a spiritual realm. God lived in the spiritual realm and had no connection with the physical realm. And this experience that was inexplicable, I think, to me until this last week, was that God moves in and out of this physical realm at His pleasure. Anytime that He needs to, wants to, He is not removed from this world. He lives beyond this world as well. And it really was kind of a limiting of Him I had in my life. And there was just kind of this physical reality of God's presence. I want to challenge you to take each one of your experiences and just ask simple questions. God, what can I learn about you? Now, here's the point. If you do all these things, the first warning we had from Jesus in this section was be careful of the leaven. Always needing another miracle, more evidence of God. If you go through this process and you learn this process and you do this on an ongoing basis, you won't miss the next time that God does something fantastic in your life. Your ears will be open, your eyes will see, your hearts will be soft to see and hear what God's already doing miraculously in your life. And you'll know the great God who's all around us. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning. We rejoice in all the things that you have done in our past. The first moments that we spoke with you, you spoke to us, maybe as children or as adults, and you became real, at least to us. God, we remember the first moments that you softened our hearts and we submitted our lives to your invitation to follow. And this morning we're so grateful that you gave your life that we could know you. We want to worship you for that. Amen. This morning or maybe this week sometime, I want to encourage you to take that list of stories and share some of those. Matter of fact, these divine encounter stories should become part of your family life, your family heritage. My grandmother passed down a story to her son, my dad, and I have lived with that story all my life of God's miraculous provision for her when he was a little bitty boy. And these stories are it's very similar to the Old Testament. Matter of fact, much of what we do in Christianity is remembering stories of God's grace, provision, work in the past. I want to encourage you to begin to share those with your family if they don't know them. Tell what it means, what you've learned from those stories as you go forward. I think it will impact your faith relationship in your family of God's great provision and protection for you and ultimately for them. It will generate faith. Thank you so much for being at Journey this morning. Once again, if you're a guest with us, swing by the kiosk on your way out and there's information there for you. Have a great